Welcome to Dear HOA. I'm Michael Vincent, and today I'm going to tell you a story about arrogance. The kind of arrogance that makes someone believe they can do anything without consequences. This is the story of a woman who ruled her neighborhood like a personal kingdom for 11 years, and about the only man who dared to say no to her, a retired Army colonel who just wanted to live peacefully in the house his mother left behind. She called the cops to arrest his son right at their front door. What she didn't know was that he had been waiting for exactly that moment. If you're watching from the beginning, drop a comment and let me know. And now, the story begins. You're not allowed to be here. That was the first thing I heard when I stepped out of my truck after 14 hours of driving from Fort Bragg to Arizona. The woman standing in front of my mother's house, the house I had just inherited, wore a white polo shirt with Willowbrook Estates HOA embroidered in gold thread. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her lips pressed together as if she were holding back some anger I didn't yet understand. I noticed she held no clipboard, no folder, no documentation of any kind, just the confidence of authority she assumed I would not question. 28 years in the United States Army taught me to recognize the difference between real power and performance. This woman was putting on a show. Donald, my son, was asleep in the back seat, 22 years old, exhausted from the long journey, his headphones still on from the podcast about black holes he'd been listening to. He was studying astrophysics through an online university program, and space was the only thing that could hold his attention for 14 hours straight. I knew that if I woke him in this situation, the sudden change would unsettle him. He needed routine, he needed predictability, and this woman standing in my driveway was offering neither. So, I kept my voice calm, the way I'd learned to do in situations far more dangerous than a suburban standoff. "I'm Joseph Rodriguez," I said. "This is my mother's house. She passed away last month. I'm the legal heir." I watched her face for any sign of softening. There was none. "I'm aware that Eleanor Rodriguez has passed," she replied, "but that doesn't change the fact that this property has 17 unresolved violations. And the HOA has strict policies about new residents needing approval before moving in. 17 violations. My mother had lived in this house for 31 years. She kept her lawn trimmed, her flowers watered, and her mailbox painted. The idea that she'd accumulated 17 violations was absurd, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked a simple question. "May I see the documentation for these violations?" The woman, she hadn't introduced herself yet, blinked, just once, a micro-expression that told me she hadn't expected the question. "I'll send it via email," she said, recovering quickly. "In the meantime, I strongly advise you to find temporary accommodation until this matter is resolved." I looked past her, toward the end of the street. An elderly woman stood on her porch, watching us. When our eyes met, she looked away immediately. At the entrance of the community, I'd noticed a sign that read, "Willowbrook Estates, a Beverly Martinez community, not managed by, not represented by, but a Beverly Martinez community, as if she personally owned every house on the block." "And you are?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Beverly Martinez, HOA president." She said it the way a general announces their rank. "And I need you to leave immediately, before I'm forced to contact the authorities." Contact the authorities, because I wanted to enter my own home. I took a breath. "I'll wait for your email, Mrs. Martinez. In the meantime, I need to get my son inside." I didn't wait for her permission. I turned, walked to the truck, and gently woke Donald. He stirred, pulled off his headphones, and looked around with that slightly confused expression he always wore when transitioning between activities. "We're here," I said softly. "Grandma's house, remember?" He nodded slowly, processing. Then he saw Beverly Martinez standing in the driveway, and his brow furrowed. "Who's that?" he asked. "Nobody important," I told him. "Let's go inside." Beverly didn't block our path. She wasn't bold enough for that, but she stood watching as I guided Donald toward the front door. I could feel her eyes on my back, cataloging every detail. The key still worked. My mother's spare, the one she'd given me 20 years ago. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon, the candles my mother loved to burn. Family photos lined the hallway. Donald recognized his old room immediately, the one he had slept in during visits to his grandmother, And for the first time all day, he smiled. "It still has the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling," he said. "Grandma never took them down." That small detail, those plastic stars we'd stuck up there when he was 12, broke something in my chest, but I held it together. There would be time to grieve later. Then I saw it. On the refrigerator door, a yellow notice. Notice of violation, failure to maintain exterior, fine, $500, due in 14 days. The date on the notice was 2 weeks after my mother's death. They had found a dead woman. I pulled the notice down and examined it closely. No specific code citation, no reference to which section of the CC&Rs had been violated. Just a fine and a deadline. Donald was watching me. He didn't understand the legal implications, but he sensed something was wrong. He always did. "Dad, that paper looks official," he said, "but the font is different from the font Grandma used to get." He was right. The formatting was inconsistent. Amateur work dressed up to look authoritative. I took out my phone and photographed the notice, making sure to capture the date clearly. Then I sent an email to Robert Finch, the real estate attorney who had helped me process my mother's will. "Robert, arrived at Willowbrook. Already have issues with the HOA. Attached is a violation notice dated after my mother's busing. Please advise on Arizona HOA law regarding fines and proper notification procedures." I hit send, then looked out the window. Beverly Martinez was still standing at the end of the street, talking to another neighbor. Her hand gestured toward my house repeatedly. The neighbor nodded along but kept their eyes down, the posture of someone who had learned not to disagree. She was building a narrative, and I was just the opening chapter. You might wonder why I didn't confront her immediately. Why didn't I point out that she had no authority to stand on my property and issue commands? But 28 years in the military taught me something valuable. The most dangerous enemy is one who believes they're untouchable. And the best way to defeat them is to let them prove that belief wrong, in front of everyone. So I waited, I documented, and I let Beverly Martinez think she was winning. The email arrived at 11:47 that night. I found it the next morning at 5:30. Old Army habits don't disappear just because you've retired. The subject line read, "Chen Property, Violation Report, even though my name is Rodriguez." A small detail, but telling. They were using a template, copying and pasting accusations without even bothering to change the names. The attachment was a 17-page document listing every alleged violation against my mother's property. I poured myself a cup of coffee and began reading. By the third page, I understood exactly what kind of operation Beverly Martinez was running. Grass exceeding 4 inches, $150. Mailbox not conforming to color standards, $100. Garage door showing paint deterioration, $200. Trash collected on the wrong day, $75. And my personal favorite, unfamiliar vehicle parked on driveway, $50. That unfamiliar vehicle was my truck, parked on my own property. Total, $2,350, due in 7 days. I scrolled through all 17 pages looking for a single citation to the CC&Rs. There was none, just accusations and dollar amounts. No reference to which covenant had been breached. A demand letter dressed up as a legal procedure. I called Robert Finch at 8 o'clock, as soon as his office opened. "Joseph, I've worked with Willowbrook HOA before," he said, his voice carrying a weariness I recognized immediately. "Beverly Martinez has been president for 11 years. Nobody runs against her." I asked why. "Because everyone who tried eventually sold their house and moved away." 11 years, nearly 400 homes, not a single successful challenge. I filed that information away and moved to what mattered. "Robert, does Arizona law require a cure period before fines?" He checked his files. 10 days minimum. Homeowner must have the opportunity to correct the violation. I made a note. "And financial records? What's the timeline for applying for access?" Another pause. 10 business days after written request. Statute 33, 1805. I asked him to file the request that afternoon. We both knew Beverly would ignore the deadline, and when she did, I would have my first piece of documented evidence. That afternoon, I was outside repainting the mailbox, using the exact shade of desert tan specified in the CC&Rs I had downloaded from the county recorder's office, when an elderly woman emerged from the house next door. She moved slowly, carefully, stopping at the property line as if crossing it might trigger an alarm. "You're Eleanor's son?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." I set down my paintbrush. "I'm Helen Patterson. Your mother was a good woman." She glanced up and down the street, her voice dropping. "Be careful with Beverly. She doesn't like new people." I wiped my hands on a rag and gave her my full attention. "Mrs. Patterson, what happened to the people who tried to stand up to her?" Helen's eyes dropped to the ground. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then the words came rushing out, as if she'd been holding them for years. "The Thompson family. They had a son with a medical condition. Beverly said his episodes were disturbing the peace, lowering property values. She fined them every single day." I kept my voice neutral. "Did they fight back?" Helen nodded, still avoiding my eyes. "They hired a lawyer. We're going to sue. However, someone then called Adult Protective Services, made accusations about how they were treating their son. 8 months to clear their names. By then, they had nothing left. They sold at a loss and vanished." There it was. Beverly didn't just issue fines. She weaponized government agencies against anyone who resisted. APS, police, whatever served her purpose. The Thompson family had been destroyed not by losing a legal battle, but by being forced to fight on multiple fronts until they collapsed from exhaustion. I thanked Helen for her courage. She hurried back inside, and I noticed her curtains closed immediately after. Even that brief conversation had been a risk for her. That night, Donald sat at the kitchen table working on his astrophysics assignment, calculating orbital decay rates in a notebook, filled with equations I only half understood. Without looking up, he said, "Dad, the neighbor lady was scared." I shouldn't have been surprised. Donald noticed things others missed. "How could you tell?" He tapped his pen against the table, a rhythm he had developed as a child. Her voice wavered at irregular intervals, like mine does when I have to talk to strangers. But hers was worse. She wasn't uncomfortable. She was afraid of being seen with you. My son, who struggled to make eye contact with cashiers, had read Helen Patterson's fear with perfect accuracy. "You're right," I told him. "She's afraid. A lot of people here are." Donald finally looked up from his equations. "Will we have to be afraid too?" I held his gaze steadily. "No, because fear only works when you don't see it coming. And I see everything she's doing." He considered this for a moment, then nodded and returned to his calculations. For Donald, that was acceptance. For me, it was a promise I intended to keep. You might think this is the moment I should have struck back and exposed her immediately. Filed complaints, called reporters, made noise. But that's exactly what she expected. Every family before me had reacted the same way. Fought openly, exhausted themselves, and lost. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I was going to let her believe she was winning. Let her grow confident. Let her make the one mistake that people drunk on power always make. They overreach. And when she did, I would be ready with everything I needed. Documented, time-stamped, undeniable. Day 3 began like any other morning. Coffee brewing, Donald reviewing lecture notes on his laptop, sunlight streaming through my mother's kitchen windows. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Robert Finch. "Check the Willowbrook community message board, now." I opened the app that every resident was required to download. Beverly's communication channel, her way of controlling information within the community. The most recent post had been published 2 hours earlier, authored by Beverly Martinez herself. The post read, "Community alert. An unknown man has moved into the late Eleanor Rodriguez's property without completing the HOA approval process. This individual claims to be a military veteran, but has refused to verify. More concerning, he has brought an adult male with him who exhibits highly unusual behavior, no eye contact, repetitive physical movements, and appears mentally unstable. For the safety of our children and community, I advise all residents to avoid contact and report any suspicious activity immediately." Capital letters for emphasis. Fear dressed up as civic responsibility. 127 reactions. 43 comments echoed her alarm. All from people who had never met us, knew nothing about us except what this woman had told them. I screenshot everything. The post, the comments, the timestamps. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Donald stood in the kitchen doorway, his own phone in his hand. His face was expressionless, but I knew my son. The stillness was not calm. It was armor. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. She wrote about me. I set my phone down slowly. Donald, highly unusual behavior, mentally unstable. He read the words aloud, each one precise. His fingers began tapping against his thigh, the rhythm that had been within him since childhood. Is that what people see when they look at me? One question, 5 seconds to answer. 22 years of therapy, of practicing social scripts, of celebrating small victories, and a stranger with a keyboard had reduced him to a threat to be reported and avoided. I gestured for Donald to sit down across from me. Do you remember what Dr. Reeves told you when you got your diagnosis? He nodded slowly. She said my brain processes information differently. Not wrong, just different. That's right. And that woman wrote those things because she fears what she doesn't understand. That's her limitation, not yours. Donald was quiet for a moment. Then, in Star Trek, Spock was different from everyone else. Half human, half Vulcan. The crew didn't always understand him, but Captain Kirk valued him precisely because he thought differently. He paused. Spock never pretended to be something he wasn't, and he still became first officer. I felt my throat tighten. That's exactly right. Donald looked at me directly, rare for him when emotional. You're not going to let her win, are you? No, but I'm going to beat her the way Spock would, with logic, with evidence, with patience. For the first time since reading that post, Donald almost smiled. Logical. I can work with logic. I forwarded the screenshots to Robert Finch with a single question. Defamation? His response came within the hour. Defamation per se. Attacking character, implying mental illness without factual basis. Especially actionable against a vulnerable adult. Document everything. Do not respond publicly. Let her continue. Let her continue. Every attack was another piece of evidence. Every lie was another count in a future complaint. The more confident she grew, the more reckless she would become. That afternoon, I took Donald for a walk around the neighborhood. I needed to see how far Beverly's poison had spread. We didn't have to wait long. A family was playing in their front yard. 2 kids, maybe 8 and 10, tossing a football with their father. The moment he saw us approaching on the sidewalk, he froze. Then, without a word, he gathered both children and ushered them inside. The door closed, the blinds followed. Donald watched the whole thing unfold with clinical precision. He didn't even know who we were until he saw us, he said quietly. He just knew we were the ones from the post. We walked home in silence. But as we reached the front door, Donald stopped. Dad, this isn't just about us, is it? I turned to face him. What do you mean? The Thompson family, the ones Mrs. Patterson told you about. Beverly did this to them too, posted about them, turned everyone against them. He was connecting patterns, the way he always did, his mind organizing data into systems. If nobody stops her, she'll keep doing it. To the next family, and the one after that. I nodded. That's exactly right. Donald's jaw tightened, an expression I rarely saw on him. Then we have to be the ones who stop her, not just for us, for everyone too scared to fight back. My 22-year-old son, the one Beverly Martinez had publicly labeled mentally unstable, had just articulated the moral stakes of this situation more clearly than any lawyer could have. I put my hand on his shoulder. We will, but we do it smart. We do it by the book. And when we're done, she won't be able to hurt anyone in this neighborhood ever again. Donald considered this, then nodded once. For him, that was an agreement. For me, it was a covenant. We walked inside together, and I began preparing for what came next.
I've faced enemy fire. I've made decisions that determined whether soldiers under my command lived or died. But nothing has ever cut as deep as watching my son read those words and ask, is that what people see? This stopped being about property disputes the moment she targeted Donald. Now it's about proving to him that being different doesn't mean being less. That the world has room for minds like his. And I will dismantle everything Beverly Martinez has built before I let her make him believe otherwise.
Day 5. I sat at my mother's kitchen table with 47 pages of CC&Rs spread before me. The governing documents of Willowbrook Estates, downloaded from the county recorder's office. Most people never read these documents. They sign them at closing, file them away, and forget they exist until someone like Beverly Martinez weaponizes them. I intended to know every word. By mid-morning, I had identified 7 significant irregularities. Not violations of procedure, violations of basic logic. Article 12, Section 3 stated that all fines must be approved by the Board of Directors during an official meeting, with minutes recorded and filed. I had received $2,350 in fines. Where were the meeting minutes? Article 8, Section 7 required annual financial reports to be distributed to all members by January 31st each year. My mother had lived here for 31 years. In the boxes of her paperwork I'd sorted through, I found exactly 0 financial reports from the HOA. Article 15, Section 2 mandated that the HOA president be elected every 2 years at the annual meeting. Beverly had held the position for 11 years. That meant at least 5 elections. Yet Helen Patterson couldn't remember a single one ever taking place. I called Helen that afternoon. "Mrs. Patterson, do you recall the last time there was an HOA election?" A long silence on the line. I don't remember any elections, Mr. Rodriguez. Beverly just always been the president. We get a notice every year that says the current board will continue serving. Nobody ever questions it. Nobody questions it. That phrase echoed in my mind. An entire community had surrendered its governance rights simply because asking questions felt too dangerous. I thanked her and hung up, then made a note in my file. No verified elections. Self-appointed authority maintained through manufactured consent. The next call went to Robert Finch. The financial records request. Any response yet? Robert's sigh told me everything. She emailed this morning, said your request is under review and to expect a response within 30 days. I almost laughed. Arizona statute gives her 10 business days, not 30. I know. I've already documented the violation. But Joseph, this is actually good news. I understood immediately. Because now we have evidence she's deliberately obstructing access to records she's legally required to provide. Exactly. And when someone works this hard to hide financial documents, it usually means those documents contain something worth hiding. I nearly made a mistake that afternoon. After reviewing the CC&Rs for the 4th time, I drafted a formal complaint to the Arizona Department of Real Estate, detailing every procedural violation I'd uncovered. My finger hovered over the send button. Then I stopped. This was exactly what Beverly expected. Every family before me had done the same thing, filed complaints, made accusations, tried to fight on official channels, and Beverly had years of practice deflecting such attacks. She would claim ignorance, promise to investigate, produce some fabricated paperwork, and the complaint would disappear into bureaucratic limbo while she continued her campaign against me. I deleted the draft. Not yet. I needed more than procedural violations. I needed evidence of something that couldn't be explained away. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Helen Patterson had given my number to Gary Morrison, a 74-year-old retiree who had served on the HOA board 8 years earlier. We met at a coffee shop 15 miles outside of Willowbrook, far from any neighbors who might report back to Beverly. Gary looked tired in the way that people do when they've carried guilt for too long. "I was on the board for 3 years, he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. Tried to do the right thing, ask questions about the budget, demand proper accounting. Beverly didn't like questions. What happened? I asked. Gary's jaw tightened. She called an emergency board meeting while I was visiting my daughter in California, changed the bylaws to require 100% attendance at all meetings. Since I'd missed one, I was automatically removed. He finally looked up at me. The vote was 2-1. She and her husband, he was still alive then, were against me. That's all it took. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive, sliding it across the table. I kept copies of everything from my time on the board, emails, financial statements, meeting minutes, the real ones, not the versions she filed with the county. I took the drive, feeling its weight. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Gary's expression hardened. "Because I watched the Thompsons get destroyed, and the Gaines before them, and the family on Maple Lane whose name I can't even remember anymore because Beverly erased them so completely." He leaned forward. "I was too scared to fight back then. But I'm 74 years old now, Mr. Rodriguez. I've got nothing left to lose. And from what I hear, neither do you." That night, after Donald went to bed, I opened the USB drive on my laptop. The files were organized meticulously. Gary had been an accountant before retiring, and it showed. I pulled up the financial statements from his tenure and compared them to the limited records I'd been able to obtain from public sources. The reserve fund 8 years ago held $412,000. Current county filings showed $285,000, a difference of $127,000. I cross-referenced every major expense listed in the official records. New pool equipment, except the pool hadn't been renovated. Landscaping contract increase, except the same company had been servicing the community at the same rate for 15 years. Road resurfacing, except I had driven every street in Willowbrook and found no evidence of recent paving. $127,000 had vanished into expenses that didn't exist. Beverly Martinez wasn't just a tyrant, she was a thief.
You might think this is the moment I exposed everything, called the police, contacted the media, made sure the whole world knew what Beverly Martinez had done. But I've learned that timing matters more than evidence. If I struck now, she would lawyer up, claim the discrepancies were accounting errors, and bury the investigation in legal delays. I needed her to make one more move, something so blatant, so undeniable, that no lawyer could spin it away. So I waited, and I watched. Because the one thing people like Beverly can never resist is the urge to overreach.
Day 7. The envelope arrived by certified mail, return address listed as Maricopa County Superior Court. I signed for it, walked inside, and opened it at the kitchen table with steady hands. Inside was a document titled Temporary Restraining Order, and for approximately 90 seconds, I believed Beverly Martinez had outmaneuvered me. The order stated that I, Joseph Rodriguez, was prohibited from approaching Beverly Martinez within 500 feet. I was banned from attending any community events at Willowbrook Estates. Violation would result in immediate arrest. The reason given, defendant has exhibited threatening behavior toward petitioner, including verbal intimidation and stalking, creating reasonable fear for petitioner's safety. I had never threatened anyone. I had never followed Beverly anywhere. I had spoken to her exactly once, on the day I arrived, and had avoided her completely since then. Yet here was a court order claiming I was a danger to her safety. Then I looked closer. The judge's signature seemed slightly off, not the crisp practice scrawl of someone who signs hundreds of documents daily. The case number format didn't match Arizona's standard system, and the letterhead used a font I didn't recognize from any official correspondence. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Arizona Court's public access portal. Every legitimate case in Maricopa County is logged here, searchable by case number or party name. I entered the number from my document. No results. I entered my name. Nothing. Beverly Martinez. Nothing. The restraining order was fake. She had fabricated a court document, a felony under Arizona Revised Statutes Section 13-2006, carrying up to 2.5 years in prison. Now, I'm going to pause here. I'm Michael Vincent, the one telling you this story today on the Dear HOA channel. If you were in Joseph's position right now, holding proof that someone forged a legal document to use against you, what would you do? Report it immediately? Confront her? Call a lawyer? Drop your answer in the comments below so we can see whose solution is the best. Thank you, and let's continue. Most people would go straight to the police and watch Beverly get arrested, but that's exactly what she expected. If I reported the forgery now, she could claim it was a misunderstanding, a draft sent by accident, her lawyer's error. The charge would be reduced or dismissed. However, if she called the police claiming I violated this restraining order, one that doesn't exist in any system, that becomes filing a false police report. Combined with the forged document, multiple felonies. And if she used those false claims to try to remove Donald from our home, we would enter federal territory. Deprivation of rights under color of law. I needed her to weaponize this document officially. Then there would be no explaining it away. I made 3 calls that afternoon. The first was to Robert Finch, forwarding scanned copies of the fake document. The second to a contact at the FBI field office in Phoenix, a former Army colleague in white-collar crime. I didn't ask him to investigate. I simply informed him I was preserving evidence of potential federal violations. The third call went to another colleague at Fort Huachuca, asking him to hold a sealed envelope containing everything I had gathered. If anything happened to, or Donald, he had instructions to deliver the contents to the Arizona Attorney General, the FBI, and 3 news outlets simultaneously. Donald found me in the kitchen that evening, studying the document. "Dad, what is that?" He was 22. He had a right to understand. "Mrs. Martinez sent this. It's supposed to be a court order keeping me away from her, but it's fake. She fabricated it. Donald examined the paper with analytical focus. If it's fake, why not just report it? Because I need her to use it first. To call the police, make official claims. Then it's not a mistake she can explain away. It's a crime she committed on record. Donald processed this for a moment. Then, "You're setting a trap." I nodded. "One she's going to walk into because she can't help herself." He was quiet, turning the implications over in his mind the way he worked through complex equations. Finally, he looked up. "What do you need me to do?" The question caught me off guard. I had been trying to shield him from the worst of this, but Donald wasn't asking to be protected. He was asking for help. "Just keep doing what you're doing," I said. "Stay calm. Don't engage with her or anyone she sends. And if anything happens, anything at all, you call Robert Finch first, then 911. In that order." He nodded once. "Understood." No fear in his voice, just clarity.
Some of you watching are nervous right now. You're thinking this is too risky. What if she escalates further? What if someone gets hurt before the trap closes? I understand. But here's what I've learned. You don't win against someone like Beverly by reacting to every provocation. You win by choosing the moment of decisive engagement. She had 11 years of victories because everyone fought on her terms, in her time frame, by her rules. I was about to change all three, and she had no idea it was coming.
Day 9. I was replacing a section of fence that had weathered badly over the past year, one of the few legitimate maintenance issues on the property, when a Maricopa County Sheriff's cruiser pulled up to the curb. My hands kept working, but my mind shifted into assessment mode. This could be Beverly's next move. She might have already used the fake restraining order. I set down my tools and walked toward the vehicle as the deputy stepped out. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the alert posture of someone who took the job seriously. His nameplate read Williams. "Mr. Rodriguez?" His tone was neutral, professional. "That's me." I kept my hands visible, relaxed. "I'm Deputy Jake Williams." I was hoping we could talk privately for a few minutes. Not, "I need to ask you some questions." Not, "There's been a complaint." He wanted to talk. I gestured toward the house. "Come inside, I'll make coffee." He glanced around the street, checking who might be watching, then nodded. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know about why he was really here. Inside, Donald was working at the kitchen table, headphones on, absorbed in a lecture about gravitational lensing. He noticed the uniform, removed one earbud, and looked at me with a question in his eyes. "It's fine," I said. "Deputy Williams just wants to talk. Keep studying." Donald nodded and returned to his lecture, though I noticed he kept one earbud out. Williams observed the interaction without comment, then took a seat at the table across from me. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct with you." He kept his voice low, even though Donald's headphones would have blocked most of our conversation. "I've received multiple calls from Mrs. Martinez about you over the past week. Complaints about threatening behavior, suspicious activity, concerns about your son." He paused. "But I've also received calls from Mrs. Martinez about other residents over the past 3 years. Dozens of them. And when I investigated those complaints, I found the same thing every time." I waited. Nothing. No evidence of wrongdoing, no witnesses to corroborate her claims, just her word against theirs. And somehow, every single one of those families eventually moved away. I poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him. "Why are you telling me this, Deputy?" Williams wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. "Because I'm tired of being used as a weapon against innocent people. I became a cop to protect communities, not to help one person terrorize them." He met my eyes directly. "I can't take action against her based on suspicion. I need evidence. But I wanted you to know that if she escalates, if she files a formal complaint or tries to use law enforcement to harm you or your son, I'll be there, with my body camera running, and I'll make sure everything is documented properly." This was the first crack in Beverly's armor. For 11 years, she had operated with the assumption that local authorities would always take her side, or at least stay neutral. She didn't know that her own tactics had created an enemy within the system. "Deputy Williams," I said, "I appreciate you taking this risk. I know it's not easy to go against someone with her connections." He shrugged. "She doesn't have as many connections as she thinks. Most people around here are just afraid of her. Fear isn't loyalty. It disappears the moment people see an alternative. After Williams left, I sat alone in the kitchen, processing the implications. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Rodriguez, my name is Linda Torres. I live at 42 Maple Lane. I saw what Beverly posted about you and your son. I don't believe a word of it. If you ever need a witness for anything, I'm here. Before I could respond, another message arrived from a different number. Dave Kowalski, number 78. Beverly did the same thing to my family 2 years ago. We almost lost everything. If you're building a case against her, count me in. Over the next 2 hours, 11 messages arrived from 11 different households. Each one had a story. Each one had been victimized by Beverly Martinez in some way. Fines for imaginary violations, public humiliation on the community board, threats of liens and lawsuits. Some had been forced to pay thousands in bogus fees. Others had watched their reputations destroyed over minor disputes. One family had their adult daughter reported to her employer for erratic behavior that never occurred. The daughter lost her job. They never recovered financially. One message stood out. It came from a number with no name attached, just a single line. We call her the HOA Hydra. Cut off one head, 2 more grow back. But maybe you're the one who can find the heart. The HOA Hydra. 11 years of accumulated resentment compressed into a mythology. These people had been waiting for someone to fight back. They just needed to believe it was possible. I responded to each message with the same instructions. Document everything, dates, times, witnesses, and any evidence you still have. Send it to me via email. Do not post anything publicly. Do not confront Beverly directly. We need the element of surprise. Within 48 hours, I had received files from 9 of the 11 families, photographs of violation notices, screenshots of threatening messages, bank statements showing payments to the HOA for fees that never appeared in official records, medical bills from stress-related illnesses. One family sent a recording of Beverly threatening to make their lives hell if they didn't vote the way she wanted at a board meeting. The recording was 3 years old. They had been too afraid to use it. Robert Finch reviewed the materials and called me with barely contained excitement. "Joseph, this is extraordinary. We have enough here for a civil RICO case, racketeering, pattern of criminal activity conducted through an organization. Combined with the financial discrepancies Gary documented, we're looking at fraud, extortion, and potentially embezzlement." I told him to keep building the file. We weren't ready to strike yet, but we were getting close. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. Donald was sitting on the front porch, reading a book about exoplanets, when a young man around 20 years old walked up from across the street. I watched from the window, ready to intervene if necessary. "Hey," the young man said, "you're the new guy, right? The one Mrs. Martinez keeps posting about?" Donald looked up, his expression guarded. "Yes." The young man grinned. "Cool. I'm Tyler. My mom told me to stay away from you because you're supposedly dangerous or whatever. But you're just sitting there reading about space, so I figured that was probably garbage." He sat down on the porch steps without waiting for an invitation. "What are you reading?" For the next hour, I watched my son have a conversation with someone his own age. They talked about exoplanets, then video games, then some online series about artificial intelligence that I'd never heard of. Tyler didn't flinch at Donald's occasional long pauses or his tendency to info dump about topics that interested him. He just listened, asked questions, and laughed at things Donald said that were apparently funny. When Tyler finally left, Donald came inside with an expression I hadn't seen since we arrived in Arizona. "Dad," he said, "I think I made a friend." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I think you did too."
You want to know what kept me going through the hardest parts of this fight? It wasn't the evidence we were gathering, or the legal strategy taking shape, or even the prospect of watching Beverly Martinez face consequences. It was moments like this one. My son, sitting on a porch in the Arizona sun, talking to someone who saw him as a person instead of a diagnosis. Building something real in a place that tried to reject us. That's what I was fighting for. Not revenge, not vindication, just the right to exist here, peacefully, as ourselves.
Day 12 began like any other morning. Coffee at 5:30, Donald's astronomy podcast playing softly from his room, sunlight warming the kitchen tiles my mother had picked out 20 years ago. By 9:47, everything had changed. The doorbell rang with the sharp, insistent tone of official business. I checked the camera feed before opening. 2 sheriff's cruisers sat in my driveway. Behind them, a white sedan with the logo of Arizona Adult Protective Services. My chest tightened, but I controlled my breathing the way I had learned in situations far more dangerous than this. I opened the door. Deputy Williams stood on my porch, his expression taut with tension. Beside him was an older deputy I didn't recognize. His nameplate read Harmon, and his face carried the weathered indifference of someone who had stopped asking questions years ago. Behind them stood a woman in a gray blazer holding a clipboard. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, "I'm Charlotte Price from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report concerning a vulnerable adult residing at this address. We need to conduct an immediate welfare check." Her voice was professional, rehearsed. She had done this many times before. Time seemed to slow. I heard Donald's footsteps pause in the hallway behind me. He had heard the words vulnerable adult and was listening. I heard a car door close at the end of the street and knew without looking that Beverly Martinez had positioned herself to watch her plan unfold, and I felt the weight of everything I had built over the past 12 days pressing against this single moment. One wrong word, one flash of anger, and she would win. "What specific allegations are contained in the report?" I kept my voice level, curious rather than defensive. Charlotte Price glanced at her clipboard. "The report states that an adult male with documented mental health issues is being held against his will at this residence, that he is not receiving appropriate care, and that he may pose a danger to himself or others due to untreated psychiatric conditions." Every word was a lie. Every accusation is designed to trigger an emergency removal. Beverly had learned from the Thompson case. She knew exactly which buttons to push. "May I ask who filed this report?" Charlotte shook her head. "That information is confidential." Of course it was. Anonymous accusations, impossible to directly challenge. But I didn't need her to confirm what I already knew. "I understand you have a job to do, Ms. Price, but I want to be clear about the legal parameters here. Under Arizona law, you have the authority to investigate allegations of abuse or neglect. However, entering a private residence without consent requires either a warrant or documented evidence of imminent danger. Do you have either?" Deputy Harmon stepped forward, his patience already thin. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just let us inside, answer some questions, and we'll be out of your hair." His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to communicate the threat. I didn't move. "Deputy, I'm a retired Army colonel with 28 years of service, including 15 years working with military law enforcement and JAG. I know my rights, and I know yours. Without a warrant or exigent circumstances, you cannot enter this home without my consent, and I do not consent." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Donald hadn't appeared in the doorway beside me. He was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt with a picture of the Andromeda Galaxy on it. His hair was slightly disheveled from sleep. He looked exactly like what he was, a 22-year-old college student who had been interrupted during his morning routine. "Dad," he said, "what's going on?" Charlotte Price's expression shifted as she took in Donald's appearance. Whatever she had been told to expect, this wasn't it. "Are you Donald Rodriguez?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Yes." Donald looked at her with open curiosity. "Are you from the government?" "I work for Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you might need help." Donald's brow furrowed, his processing expression. "Help with what?" "I'm working on my astrophysics thesis. Did you know that Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, probably has a liquid ocean under its ice shell? The tidal forces from Jupiter's gravity create enough heat to keep water liquid. There might be life there, not like aliens in movies, but maybe microorganisms." He paused. "Sorry, I do that sometimes. Go off on tangents about space. It's my special interest." Deputy Williams, standing silently until now, covered his mouth to hide what might have been a smile. Charlotte Price looked down at her clipboard, then back at Donald, then at me. The disconnect between the dangerous, mentally unstable person described in the report and the young man enthusiastically explaining astrobiology was impossible to ignore. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said carefully, "Donald seems fine." Before I could respond, a voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Why isn't he arrested yet?" Beverly Martinez strode up the driveway, her face contorted with fury. She had been watching from her car, waiting for the triumphant moment when the police dragged us away. Instead, she found everyone standing on my porch having a calm conversation about Jupiter's moons. "I filed that report. He's dangerous. He's mentally ill. And this man," she pointed at me, "is violating a court order by being anywhere near me." I turned to Deputy Williams. "Deputy, can you confirm whether there is any restraining order involving me in the Maricopa County system?" Williams didn't hesitate. "We checked before coming here, Mr. Rodriguez. There's no restraining order on file. No case. Nothing." I looked at Beverly. "Mrs. Martinez, you just stated, in front of 2 law enforcement officers wearing body cameras, that I'm violating a court order, but as Deputy Williams just confirmed, no such order exists. Which means either you received a fraudulent document and believed it was real, or you created that document yourself and have been attempting to use it to manipulate law enforcement into taking action against me." Beverly's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For 11 years, she had controlled every narrative. Every confrontation had gone according to her script, but this script had just been torn apart in front of witnesses, on camera, with her own words as evidence. My lawyer handled that," she stammered. There must be some mistake." I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. "What's your lawyer's name, Mrs. Martinez? I'll need to contact them to clarify this misunderstanding." She couldn't answer, because there was no lawyer. There had never been. I watched Beverly Martinez's hands tremble as she stood in my driveway with nowhere to run. Not the performative trembling of someone playing victim, the genuine, involuntary shaking of a person who has just realized they've destroyed themselves. Her eyes darted between the deputies, the APS worker, and me, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. 11 years of unchallenged power, and it all collapsed in 90 seconds because she couldn't resist the urge to watch her own victory. She had come to witness my destruction. Instead, she witnessed the beginning of her own. The 48 hours following Beverly's meltdown moved with the precision of a military operation. Deputy Williams filed his report that same afternoon, including body camera footage of Beverly claiming a restraining order that didn't exist. I submitted the forged court document to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, along with a formal complaint. Robert Finch delivered our complete evidence file to the Arizona Attorney General, 11 families worth of documentation, financial records showing $127,000 in misappropriated funds, and Gary Morrison's meticulous accounting of every discrepancy he had witnessed during his time on the board. By the end of the week, Beverly Martinez was facing more legal trouble than her 11 years of power could shield her from. The charges came down in stages. First, the county, forgery of court documents, a Class 4 felony carrying up to 2.5 years, filing a false report with law enforcement, a Class 1 misdemeanor. Then the state investigation into HOA finances revealed what Gary's records had suggested: systematic embezzlement disguised as maintenance expenses that never occurred. Another felony charge. Finally, the FBI field office in Phoenix opened an inquiry into potential federal violations. Deprivation of rights under color of law, using fabricated legal documents to weaponize government agencies against private citizens. The investigation was ongoing, but my contact assured me they were taking it seriously. Beverly hired a defense attorney, a real one this time, and began the slow, humiliating process of negotiating her future. The final plea deal, reached 3 months after that morning on my porch, included 2 years of supervised probation, full restitution of $127,000 to the HOA Reserve Fund, and a 10-year ban from holding any position in a homeowners association or community organization. She also agreed to sell her house and leave Willowbrook Estates, not because anyone forced her to, because no one would speak to her anymore. The woman who had ruled through fear discovered that fear evaporates the moment people stop believing in your power. 2 weeks after the plea deal, Willowbrook held its first legitimate HOA election in over a decade. 89 residents voted to dissolve the existing board structure and elect 3 new members with term limits and mandatory financial audits. Helen Patterson was elected president, a role she accepted with the quiet determination of someone who had waited years for the chance to make things right. Several residents asked me to serve on the board. I declined. "I didn't come here to run anything," I told them at the community meeting. "I came here to live in peace with my son. Let the people who have been here longer rebuild what was broken. I'll support however I can, but this community belongs to you." The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for themselves, for finally taking back what Beverly had stolen from them. I slipped out before anyone could make speeches and walked home through streets that felt different now. Neighbors waved from their porches. Children played in front yards without parents nervously watching for violations. Dave Kowalski was hosting a barbecue and shouted an invitation as I passed. This was what Willowbrook was supposed to be, what it could have been all along if one person hadn't decided her authority mattered more than everyone else's dignity. That night, Donald and I sat in the backyard, watching stars emerge one by one against the Arizona sky. He had his telescope out, a gift from his grandmother years ago, and was tracking Jupiter's position near the horizon. "Dad," he said without looking away from the eyepiece, "do you think Mrs. Martinez was always like that? Or did she become that way over time?" I considered the question. I think power does strange things to people who aren't prepared for it. She started out thinking she was protecting the community. Somewhere along the way, she started believing she was the community, that anyone who disagreed was an enemy. Donald adjusted the telescope's focus. That's sad, actually. She could have been someone people respected instead of feared. My son, the one Beverly had called mentally unstable, had just shown more empathy for his enemy than she had ever shown for anyone.
Helen Patterson stood at her window that evening, watching the Rodriguez men stargaze in their backyard. For 11 years, she had kept her head down. 11 years of silence, of fear, of watching good families destroyed while she did nothing. But Joseph hadn't asked her to be brave. He had simply shown her that bravery was possible. And when the moment came, she found the courage she thought she'd lost forever. Tomorrow, she would begin her first day as HOA president. Tonight, she allowed herself to believe that things could finally be different. People ask me what I learned from all of this. They expect me to talk about justice, or strategy, or the satisfaction of watching a bully face consequences. But honestly, the thing I'll remember most is sitting in that backyard with my son, looking at Jupiter through his grandmother's telescope, and realizing that we had built something here. Not just a legal victory, a home. A place where Donald could make friends and study stars and be exactly who he is without apology. That's worth more than any courtroom win. That's worth everything.